We're good? Okay, good. Awesome. Welcome to today's Tech Talk. We're live online as well for people who aren't in the room. My name is Erik Gross. I'm the co-founder of the Tech Academy, and I want to share some successful actions and advice on the job search. So, for at least people in the room, who here is a current student of the Tech Academy? Okay, good. So we have a lot of people that aren't. That's excellent. All right, who here is or will be in the very near future looking for a job in technology? Good, awesome. Okay. All right, good. So this is going to be a lot of Q&A, and you're welcome to interrupt me at any point, ask any questions. I have absolutely no problem at all. I want to be able to answer the questions you have, but I'm just going to cover a few basic points, some lessons learned in recent searches in the job market, and just like I said, any kind of Q&A you guys want. First of all, just background, I've been working developer for many years, primarily using Microsoft technologies, C# as a primary language. But like any full stack developer, I can work in anything that's out there, web technologies, database technologies, that kind of thing. Most of my working experience outside of the Tech Academy has been contract work. I do a lot of come in and be a senior developer as part of a team, or come in as the only developer and build something from the ground up. Right? Over the last 5-6 years, the school's been around. We've helped hundreds and hundreds of people get hired, and in addition to my own experience, I've learned the lessons that they're there to be learned from getting people hired through the Tech Academy. So I know what I'm talking about when it comes to getting a job. And so there's a few high-level things I want to stress, and then we'll get into some specifics. Probably the biggest thing is this, is the tenacity involved in getting a job in technology. It needs to be very, very high, which is kind of odd considering there's so many open jobs out there and there's such a lack of technology talent. But even given that fact that you're going into a market, or you're already in a market that has an extremely low unemployment rate, you still need to work very, very hard to get your job. And that isn't just your first job. It'll be that way throughout your career. So there's a couple factors involved in that. And I just want to give you a little bit of understanding of them so that when you get the inevitable no, followed by 10 to 20 to 30 successive no's, that you can kind of keep your head above water morale-wise and keep plugging. The single biggest thing to realize when you're looking to get a job is that the main reason you're going to get no is because it's just not the right fit. And it doesn't mean you're not adequate for the job, doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing. It just means that they're looking for a specific piece in their overall team, and you aren't a matching piece. That's all it means. It's not a personal judgment at all. There are plenty of times that I was passed over for a role simply because I wasn't the right piece for it. It had nothing to do with my skill or experience or anything like that. Now that said, it isn't the easiest thing in the world to be told no. So if you are a student of the Tech Academy, when you get to the point where you're on the job placement course, please avail yourself of the job placement directors. Have as many mock interviews as you possibly can. And be ready to hear no. Be ready to fail. Be ready to go and do a whiteboard presentation and just make a dog's breakfast of it and recover afterwards. You need to be tough. You have to have tenacity. So it's one of the premier, top level things I want to just stress is that it takes a lot of work to get a job. So on that, there's a work ethic involved in the job application process that is one of the hardest things to teach or get people to actually just do, which is that it really does need to be treated as a full-time job when you're getting a job. Now, some of you, if you're actively involved in a job search, you're probably feeling that. But here's orders of magnitude to think with. What do I mean by example? 10 to 20 to even more applications a day, which sounds almost insane. But a typical job search in the technology field typically involves between 80 and 200 applications. For most people, even experienced people. Now, the challenge is you hear all these, exceptions to the rule. I've got a couple of buddies, a guy who's a really senior developer, and he applied for one place, Walmart, and he got it. Great. Okay, fine. That is the exception rather than the rule. Be prepared for it to take a lot longer, and that way, if you get the first, a yes out of the first few jobs that you apply for, hey, that's fantastic. You were ready for the long haul. So that's enough about tenacity. Like I said, you have to have this toughness to be able to get through this. So let's talk about some specific things you're going to have to do on the job search. Right off the bat, I want to bring up a recent trend in technology hiring, which is the use of coding tests, and especially online platforms for coding tests. How many people here have applied for technology jobs in the last year? How many of you were asked to do some sort of a coding test? Okay. Was it an online coding test, or did they send you something, or how'd that work?
It was like an environment test, so like for Amazon, for example.
Yes.
Like a, coding environment in 30 minutes, complete the challenge.
Absolutely. So a couple things about this. One is preparation for it, and the other is actually doing it. So just to describe what I'm talking about, it describes an online environment. If you're learning to code, you know that you usually use your own environment. You use your code editor, you use your debugging tools, you use your machine, and you're very comfortable there. In many of these coding challenges you're going to be asked to do, you don't get the benefit of that. Some of them, you can actually do the coding in your own environment. If that's an option, I recommend you take it. But for some of them, you operate like I've done the Amazon test. You're in their coding environment. So in terms of preparation, they will always give you, in my experience, an opportunity to actually peruse and get used to that coding environment. Take advantage of that. You want to pay more attention to how to operate within that environment than the actual coding challenge they give you at first. And what I'm talking about is the sample coding challenge, not the real thing, right? Because again, many of them give you this opportunity to be able to drive it, to be able to figure out how it works. Take the time to figure out how does debugging work in there. How is it that I could make my program give me some sort of logging output, some sort of display to the screen halfway through, like going through a loop, for example, that can tell me what the values of all my different variables are at any point in time during the execution of my program. In other words, get used to operating in that environment as a primary task before you concentrate very heavily on what is the actual problem you're having to solve. It's a really good point in preparation because otherwise you're handling two different things at once. You're operating in an unfamiliar environment that you have to get used to, and you're freaked out because here's this sometimes rather complex coding challenge where you've got one part of your mind trying to solve what's the algorithm that's going to solve this thing, and the other part of your mind is going, well, how do I even operate here? How do I switch to the language I'm actually going to code in? How do I actually make sure that I know how to execute, and how do I make sure that the test cases, the test inputs they've given me, which are supposed to produce this exact output, how do I check to see whether or not it is? You don't want to answer those questions while you're trying to solve the coding challenge. You want to have those things all done ahead of time. So that's one of the first things I want to stress in these online coding platforms. Another point about preparation is you don't have to wait until you're given one of these by some job placement or some hiring manager or some recruiter. You can, and I highly recommend you do, prep for these yourself. The site I recommend is HackerRank. If you haven't written that down, or if you don't know about it, write down HackerRank. And it really is just over and over again, different coding challenges. Work through them. Often you'll find that a couple, they go really, really quick, and you're like, oh, that was a breeze. And then you'll hit one where you're like, wow, that took me 2 hours, and I want to claw my eyes out during the middle of it, right? Work through those. Take the time to do it. Consider that part of, I said that, applying for a job is a full-time activity. That's part of your work, is prepping for those kind of things. Now, I'm spending a fair bit of time on this. I want to stress that it's just one component of an overall job search, but it's becoming more and more demanded, required, and expected that this kind of thing happen. So there are even companies that have sprung up that manage this whole process. There are companies that are just interview companies. They'll hire a senior developer on contract, and if you're being considered for a role, like let's say here's a company called Acme and they want to hire you, they'll go to this vetting company that hires senior developers. The vetting company will get a hold of you and say, hey, we're going to do a bit of an interview and coding challenge, and they're the ones who are going to run it, and you'll often be on the line with a live person. There's another thing. You're going to be coding in front of another person. I don't know any developer who enjoys that at all. Like anytime you're trying to figure something out in your head and you're not writing any code, it's very easy to be self-conscious. Like, oh my God, I'm not doing anything. Like, I'm thinking, I don't know what the heck. But we all know if you've done any coding, most of it happens up here. But when you're doing it in front of someone else, it's really hard not to get stressed or freaked out about that kind of thing. It happens to me. So another point of preparation for these, and for any of your job placement activities, twin up with someone else. Have them actually be there. Have them watch. Explain to them what your thought process is. Get ready for these things. And that way, when you do the actual coding challenge, whether it's you all by yourself in an environment like with Amazon, right, as an example, or whether it's one of these companies that talked about that hires someone to interview you, you're used to coding in front of another person. And by the way, it also preps you for paired programming, which doesn't happen at a lot of shops, but when it does happen, it's extremely valuable. And the first time you do it, you want to be prepped for it, be ready for, oh my God, I'm gonna have to write code. How many people have had to type something while someone else is watching? And you're, right? you're totally self-conscious about every single little typo or whatever, and yet when you're all alone, you don't care, right? Know that that's a tough thing for a lot of people and prep for it. It's my recommendation. So that's a bit of advice about prepping for one of these things. Advice for actually doing them. Find out ahead of time whether you are allowed to do the development in your own environment. Many of these platforms will let you do that. You can actually literally download a little package, and it contains like the sort of framework of code that lets you just concentrate on building the algorithm. There's a whole little like computer program that they have that lets you write your computer program. You can download that whole thing, install it in your editor of choice, and you can actually do your coding exercise, your coding challenge on your own environment, which is preferable all the time, guarantee it, right? So find out ahead of time if that is in fact the case, and in your prep work, do that. Download the package, see how much time it takes, what are the challenges in making sure this thing's up and running, and don't get caught flat-footed by trying to do it for the first time during the real code challenge. Another thing, while you're doing the code challenge, what I've seen very often is there's 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5 different challenges, one after the other. And often, the first 2 or 3 or 4 go really, really quick, and then you can hit one that's going to kick your butt. It happens to all of us. When that happens, if you have any challenges past that, if you're starting to grind, stop. Walk away from it for a minute and move on to the next coding challenge. Often you'll find that next one is actually pretty easy. You snap it out, you take a win, you feel like you know what you're doing, and then if you have more time, you go back to the one that's kicking your butt, right? The other thing to know is that you're just trying to make it work at first. Here's what I mean. When you do some of these online platforms, on these online platforms when you're doing a coding challenge, they'll very often have, here's the problem you have to solve, build a little program that solves this, and here's some example inputs of what the expected output is. And they'll also say, we're going to be testing for edge cases as well, things where you're trying to do silly things like divide by 0 and you didn't account for that, or your count through your array of your collection of items is off by 1, right? They're going to test for those kind of things. Don't spend a bunch of time trying to engineer something that can cover every case at first. Just get it to work. Just build an algorithm that matches the most simple, basic test case they gave you and take a win and get it to work. After that, if you've still got time, concentrating on beefing up whatever algorithm or program you're making to account for whatever odd use cases you can think of. But if you submit something that doesn't even work for the primary examples they give you, you're toast. If you submit something that works for those and you didn't get to some of the edge cases, they're a lot more inclined to pass you through to the next stage. And finally, make liberal use of sketches. Like literally diagram out what the problem is. The fact is, like with any coding activity you're going to be given on the job, most of the work is done ahead of time before you write a line of code. Don't treat these tests any different. You may sit there for 5 or 10 minutes on a 35-minute code challenge. Take those first 5 or 10 minutes and not write a lick of code and diagram out how it's going to be. However you do that, whether it's some kind of pseudocode thing or you're like diagramming out, I've got a collection coming in here, I've got to go through each item, I've got another collection here, I've got to find matches. Put it down on paper. Make sure you really understand what the problem is. Another note on that, read through the problem statement very carefully. Don't feel a need to rush into writing the code. Really understand what they're asking you, because that's what happens in the real world. You have to clarify your understanding of the problem to be solved. Take the time to do that. Like I said, you'll be freaked out because you're not writing any code yet. Take a few minutes to really understand what it is, sketch out the solution you're initially coming up with, sketch it out on paper. So there's just some notes about this. Like I said, it's a very common trend now that on your job search you might be asked to do some of these coding challenges, and very often they're an online platform. Occasionally you can actually pull that code down and do it in your environment. Do that if you have an opportunity to. So there's a note on that. Other things that I've seen as a pretty common trend in today's job search is, well, actually this is true in all cases. We're still seeing lots and lots of ads that list like the full laundry list of every single requirement you could possibly want for that role. Don't stop yourself from applying for a role because you don't match every single case. I never match every case. And my resume is 8 pages long. I've got almost every technology you could think of on there. And it always happens. I'm looking at a job, I'm like, oh, wow, I don't have that. It doesn't matter. They know they're not going to get that. Or rather, it most often works like this. They go to human resources and say, hey, we need to pull in a developer. And the human resources says, they don't know technology typically. They say, all right, what are all the things they need to know? And the hiring manager, who knows he just wants someone that is teachable and has at least some of the core technology, still lists out everything that would be nice to have. It'd be beautiful to have this. But in his mind or her mind, they know they're not going to find that. The HR person doesn't. So they're going to write up this job description as if you have to have every web technology in use since 2000, and of course a computer science degree or other, and 7 years of experience on a technology that's been around for about 3, right? Or. You see all these things. If there are any of the technologies you're comfortable with in that job ad or that job posting, then apply. Just apply. The worst thing that happens is they look at it and they go, wow, there's just not enough of a match. But more often than not, if you have any kind of a decent resume, they'll at least give you a shot and talk to you on the phone. So now, notes about that. The next thing, the phone call. You get a phone call from either a recruiter or a hiring manager or somebody. Recognize that the initial phone call you're going to get really doesn't have much to do with your technical expertise most of the time. Honestly, what they're looking for in the phone call at first is, are you a jerk? Are you a nice person? Can they communicate with you? Are you friendly? And do they feel like they wouldn't get egg on their face by at least moving you on to the next stage? So they're going to ask high-level questions about your experience, and you only need to answer them generally in a pretty high-level form. Often the person that's calling you is not a technology person. Very often they are HR. Or if they're technology workers, they're technology adjacent. They haven't done the actual coding or the position you'll be hired for. They're close to it. This is what happens quite commonly. And so you don't want to necessarily dive into really geeky, nerdy explanations of the exact protocols you used and just a bunch of gobbledygook. It's going to go over their head. Often. Obviously, know who you're talking to. But that first phone call is very often just to get to know you. Are you friendly? Are you teachable? Have you got a little bit of humility, or are you going to be that person that comes in and is Mr. Know-It-All, right? So, another thing on that one, in terms of prep, know who it is that's going to call you. Know whether or not they fit into that category that I just described of someone who is HR or technology adjacent, or occasionally it's an actual developer on the team. That sometimes can be your first call. You have to know ahead of time, who am I going to be talking to? Where do they fit roughly inside this organization? And if you've done your homework, you'll know roughly what's the technology stack that they're going to be asking about. So be prepared for that interview, right? Another thing about the interviews, I know this is common sense, be in a distraction-free environment. Don't be sitting there at home with the kids able to run around and make a bunch of noise, or out in a coffee shop where anybody can come in the door and start talking really loudly. Have a calm, distraction-free environment. And that's for your benefit as much as it is for the person on the other end of the phone. I've done interviews with people over the phone. You can hear all kinds of commotion in the back, or they're driving, or the connection's really scratchy, and that stuff matters. It gets in the way of you communicating directly with that person. So pay attention to those kind of things. So that's a little bit of note on the initial phone call that you're going to get. Like I said, most of the time it's just sort of screening to make sure that you're like someone they honestly wouldn't be embarrassed to pass on to the next stage. Eventually, though, either in person or on the phone, you're going to have some sort of technical screening. So here's the thing to know about the technical screening. Every single one of those people you're talking to who is a developer, who is a technology worker, with any kind of experience, knows that they don't know everything, and they don't expect you to know everything either. And they know, definitely, you've got a prepared list of questions, they know they're going to ask something you don't know. They're already expecting it. And they aren't using that as a way to go, oh, wow, this guy or girl's an idiot. They fully expect it. Very often you'll hear them, especially if you do really well, and they kind of open up a bit. They go, some of those questions on there, I don't think I know the answer to that. Happens often, really often. Because who's going to take a bunch of time to just think up a bunch of questions for these kind of things? Most of the time, there's two things that happen. Either years ago, some nerd took the time to actually create a list of questions at that company, specific to that company, how they did business then. And that little piece of paper has lasted for the last 7 or 8 years, and no one wants to take the time to change it, so they just read off of those. Some of them don't apply anymore, they're full of technologies. You can hear it in their voices, they're scanning through the questions they ask, right? So that's one of the things that happen. The other thing that happens is they literally just do a Google search. Top 50 interview questions for C#. Top 50 interview questions for SQL. and they take the top 5 or 10 of them, put the list over there, the list of the questions and some answers, and they just have you go off of that. What would you do? Like if you were tasked with interviewing somebody, you're like, I don't know what to ask. All right, fine. What do people normally ask? And that's what they do, which tells you how to prepare for them. Google top 50 interview questions for C#. Google top 50 interview questions for SQL, or whatever it is you're probably going to get interviewed for. And if it kicks your butt, if you go through that, you're like, man, either I'm really shaky on that, or I've never even heard of that. Take the time to do your homework. Especially if you're a graduate of the Tech Academy, your ability to self-teach will be really good. You'll know how to discern the useless information and the confusion from, wow, that's a really decent explanation of that subject. Do your homework for these things. Don't spend a ton of time on it, but if you see a question on one of those popular, top 10 lists of interview questions, chances are that you're going to get at least 1 or 2 or 5 of those questions. It's going to happen all the time. So another thing to think with that is that when you need to practice answering those questions, because it's very easy, being the engineers that we are and the nerds that we are, right? To be given a question, they ask you, explain blah, 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 and you start explaining it, and you say a statement. You say a statement about, how to, iterate through an array, how to just go through every single element in an array. And you start explaining it, and you say, yeah, okay, you're going to start at, position 0 in the array, and you're going to go forward all the way through, or whatever, right? And instantly you think, yeah, that's true. But sometimes, depending on the language, arrays start counting at 1. Not 0. And you're going to interrupt yourself in the answer and go, well, unless it starts counting at 1, because sometimes they do that, but most languages don't, so don't ramble. Just answer the simple, basic, straightforward question. Now, I say that as advice, but when you're on the phone with a person and you catch yourself flat-footed in your own answer, if you haven't taken the time to practice answering these things, you will sound unprepared and embarrassed. And the moment you falter, it's like, this is just human nature. You're on the phone with someone. You're feeling like you're already getting like, oh man, I got to answer all these questions right. You're already nervous. You stumble. Now you can get more nervous. And you can just descend downhill from there. Practice, 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 practice these questions. If you, whether you're a student here or not, just get someone who is at roughly the same knowledge level as you are and practice these questions back and forth and become comfortable explaining them. Also recognize that while you're usually talking to someone that's technical, they aren't going to want the most detailed explanation. In fact, if you can find a way to explain a complex technical subject that they've asked you about in a relatively simple, straightforward fashion, you'll actually impress them more than some geeky, nerdy, down to the tiniest little nitty-gritty answer. Few technology workers have a gift for explaining technology concepts in a way that's simple and easy to understand. And if you do that in your interview, very often they're blown away. Like that's not what they get. They get the rambling, full meal deal explanation of something. You're trying to communicate over the phone how some complex data, data schema works and how you would actually process it using the database. Like, that's not an easy thing to communicate over the phone to anyone, right? So practice keeping it simple. But while we're still covering the fundamentals, and again, you probably heard me say practice a few times. Practice these things. Don't have the first time you stumble across something, be on the phone with that interviewer. Stumble across it with your twin, the person you're twinning up with, to actually just practice these things. So that's for that phone interview. The same thing is true though when you finally get invited in to actually do whatever kind of in-person interview. They know they're going to ask you questions you're not going to know the answer to. Here's the most important lesson I've learned over the years when that happens. If you don't get bothered by the fact that you don't know an answer, they won't get bothered. Not always true. You can get people that are occasionally like jerks, are like, oh, you didn't know that. It happens so rarely that it's almost a non-factor. Most developers understand not everybody knows everything. So just be prepared for that. Be prepared for them. Same thing, they're going to ask you questions they don't know the answer to, and don't react to it in a negative way. I can't tell you how many times in an interview I've said, wow, actually, I don't know what that acronym means. Or I don't know what that technology means. Now, this next part, sometimes it's the easiest thing in the world, unless you're a deeply inquisitive, interested person. When I hear one of those things, someone says, how much experience do you have with blah, whatever blah is? If I've never heard of blah, I want to know what that is. I genuinely want to know. So I will ask them, what is that? And I'm really asking. It isn't a stalling technique. I'm blown. I'm like, wow, I've never heard of that. What is it? instantly, because developers love helping each other. Almost 90% of the time they'll go, oh yeah, well what it is blah, 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 and they'll tell you the answer. And at that point, two things have happened. One, you've learned a piece of valuable data. You found a thing you didn't know, and now you're learning. And the second thing is, they don't register in their mind after the interview's over something you didn't know. What they remember is something they got to teach another person. And they remember it fondly, rather than, oh yeah, the guy didn't know it, and that's all I remember. He didn't know blah. Instead, they'll remember, yeah, he was super interested. So these things matter. And again, that has to be a legitimate, from the heart kind of thing. That's not like, well, here's a technique I could use. No, you need to be interested. And if you're not interested, when you hear about new elements of technology, I would take a close look at that, because that's what this industry is all about. Every single day you're learning new things. I talk a lot. Again, it's totally fine to interrupt me on anything on this or asking questions. So there you are, and you've gotten through whatever initial phone screening, and then it might be even another phone interview that's a bit more technical, and now you're in the actual building, right? Now, there's a lot of advice in one of the courses we have at the Tech Academy called the Job Placement Course about how to prepare for these things. One of the most important things, actually, is how to dress for these things. And just take a special note on this. You can find out ahead of time what the general environment is like at the prospective employer and prepare for how you're going to present your appearance. And it's a key component of the job search. Even though while you're there, after you've been there for a while on the job, things may be pretty casual, when you arrive for that job interview, you want to be there as a professional. And what that generally means is whatever the common standard for dress and behavior is, be one tiny notch above that. For example, on most job interviews, if you walk in a suit and tie in the technology world, you're going to be completely mystified. Unless you're Ben, who works at our office here, and he's the most dapper dresser I've ever met in my life. If he walked in just a plain old t-shirt instead of like a gorgeous hat and a three-piece suit, I'd be like, what happened to Ben? but that's him, okay? So if you walk in a suit and tie, that doesn't, instantly, you've alienated people. That doesn't make any sense. You're not going to be a developer and ever dress like that, right? But on the flip side, you walk in cargo shorts and Crocs, not that anybody should ever wear Crocs. Right? If you walk in cargo shorts, right, and just a plain old t-shirt, and it's maybe like a finance technology company, fintech they call that, right? And things are a little more conservative there. You're way below what they would ever expect, and that's not going to stand. You're going to stand out in a bad way. Find out what the general culture is, and just dress a tiny bit above that. That's all. Right? All right. So there you are in the interview, right? Yeah, you may be a little bit nervous, but again, recognize that two things about this. One, the people that are interviewing you don't want to be there. Just know that. They don't want to be there. Why? Because you're being interviewed by your potential teammates. And what would they be rather doing? Working. They'd rather be coding right now, doing some kind of a meeting with their project manager, or doing their job. Now, most of you professionals, you're going to have this role after you've been in the industry for a while where you're going to be pulled in to help interview new people. But when you're doing it, every minute you're there, there's something back at your desk that you're not working on. And very often, they've got part of their mind just concentrating on that thing. It's very hard not to do that as a developer. You're like, man, what is this thing? I had to walk away from it, and I was really close to fixing it. Oh yeah, I've got to interview Erik. Great, right? So have some understanding of that. I recommend having some genuine appreciation for the fact that they are taking time out of their busy day. Now that sounds like a cliche. It's true though. Hey Ben, I need to show you off. This is what I'm talking about. Okay, like it looks great, but don't arrive to your first interview like that if it's a casual place. Okay, good. We were talking about how to figure out the way you dress at an interview. Okay, so have some appreciation for the fact that they are taking time out of their busy day. And like I said, that's not a cliche. They are taking time out of their busy day. There are a bunch of other things that are demanding their time. And if you acknowledge that, it doesn't need to be obsequious or like over the top. Just, guys, I appreciate you guys taking the time to do this. Let them know that. If it's sincere, don't ever be false in these things. But please recognize it's very true. It's very true for them. They're like, man, yeah, I know we got to do this because we're understaffed and we're going to bring on another developer, and I hope this guy or girl works out. But man, I hope we can get through with this pretty quick and go back, right? So another thing to keep in mind while you're doing this is that you're very often going to be asked to do some sort of a demonstration of coding, the whiteboard, or sketch it out on paper or whatever. this is a really critical thing to try to get across. When you're being asked to do some kind of a coding challenge or a whiteboard presentation, and it's in person, it's in front of people that are going to be your peers or your seniors, they aren't really looking at your code. Now they are to a certain extent. What they're actually doing is they're trying to figure out how do you think. And thinking is by nature a very quiet internal activity. And so it isn't natural for a lot of people to talk about how they think. This is another area where preparation and practice is extremely important. When you're doing a whiteboard presentation, or not whiteboard presentation, but like a whiteboard coding exercise of some sort, it's very important to have verbal diarrhea, right? To just talk out loud the way you're thinking through. It's completely fine. In fact, if you don't do it, it's a horrible experience for the interviewers. Just picture this, that you give this guy or girl a coding challenge, and they write down the notes on it, and for the next 7 minutes, utter silence while they're figuring out the algorithm and doing it. That's unbelievably boring. Besides, they want to be involved. They're like, if they see you, here's the thing, if they see you doing something that they know in about 2 minutes, you're going to arrive at the conclusion that you just completely screwed up. Your thinking is very faulty. Those 2 minutes, that's all they can think about. That's all they can think about. I can't wait till he or she just hits that and goes, oh my. Well, never mind the last 2 minutes, I was wrong, right? But at that point, you're not even talking to them. So the first thing you say to them is how you're an idiot. So just talk all the way through it. Make sure, first of all, that you really understand the problem. Don't feel, same thing with these online platforms I was talking about earlier, where you're doing a coding challenge. Don't feel the need to instantly start writing something down. Really understand the problem. Very often, the thing that they're actually asking you is going to require you to ask a few points of clarification in order to really understand it. So they're testing a couple different things there. They're finding out, how do you work? How do you think? Are you the kind of person who's just going to immediately jump into something and start coding without understanding the real problem and then produce something that the senior developer has to come down after you and clean up? Or are you going to ask enough questions that your first stab at a solution for it is close enough to solving the original problem that it can be worked with? And you only arrive at those points by actually communicating. So recognize it isn't like an oral exam while you're up there and they're going to quiz you for everything. It's a collaborative work experience. Is the best way I think I can characterize one of these whiteboard presentations. They really want to see how you work, and they want to work with you to solve the thing. Yes?
I've been hearing a lot from different recruiters and people in the industry that whiteboarding is slowly starting to go extinct. In your experience, is that true?
Not for a senior developer.
Not for a senior developer.
In almost every single case, I'm asked to do something on a board. And if that's true, it's going to take a long time to go away. I found this. Here's the thing: these online coding, challenges and that kind of thing. Any kind of coding challenge, it's fine to test a specific aspect of your mind as a developer. It tests your ability to do algorithmic thinking, and it tests it better than almost anything. There's no substitute for when you hit run and execute. Does it actually do it? Does it actually compile, and does it solve the problem? There's no substitute for that. Does the code do what it's supposed to do? But that's a tiny part of your job. The biggest part of your job is human. The biggest part of your job is human interaction and understanding and communication, not your technical prowess or ability. And that's not something that a lot of people going into the technology industry have a real solid understanding of. We still have this idea, I talk to people at networking events all the time, I could never do that. I could never just type away all day long. I'm like, you're on crack. I don't type away all day long. I type maybe 2 to 3 hours a day, with huge chunks of 15 to 60 minutes in between of looking and thinking and talking to somebody else, and then I'll write 3 little lines of code that solve everything or whatever, right? It is a human activity, and this is your opportunity to demonstrate how human you are, to demonstrate how you get along well, how you get along with others, and whether you can think on your feet, and whether you're willing to be wrong. If you're given whatever task and you're up there and you're writing up, how to solve this thing, and you do go down the wrong path and arrive at a point where wow, that's completely wrong, are you willing to go, wow, that was completely wrong? I guarantee they'll laugh their asses off when you do that. They'll because how many times have they done that? Over and over and over again they've done that. They probably did that an hour ago, which is why they want to get back to their desk and figure out what they did wrong, right? So if you're willing to just laugh at yourself and go, wow, that was the wrong approach, they'll love that. They're not gonna be like, this guy's an idiot, he can't figure anything. No, you figure things out by collaboration. Yes, you're gonna have to do your job. And yes, a lot of the times you're gonna be writing the code, and you'll be writing it by yourself because you were given some task to fix, and you do it. But the moment you hit some, and anybody who's a student here knows this, that like, when you start to grind, you step back and you talk to somebody. You work through this, you get a second set of eyes on that. Not to do so is actually unprofessional. There's like this weird idea that like, we have to be perfect, or that failure isn't an option, or something absurd like that. No, it's not true. The actual person who's a professional will recognize that the lost time and productivity and impact on the rest of his team by not stopping for a second, going, "Hey guys, I need someone to take a look at this because I'm banging my head against the wall." You have to do it. So this is your opportunity if you have good people skills, or you're willing to do the hard work to gain good people skills. This is where you get the job. So another note about like being invited into the actual building. Generally, when you're being invited into the actual building in any kind of interview, it's your job to lose. At that point, they've already decided. And what they're looking for is, are you going to give them reasons not to hire you? So it's going to be true in my experience. So when you're there, recognize that if you're comfortable and calm, even throughout the things where you do, maybe you didn't quite get it right, you're not going to impair that. If you falter, if you argue, if you demonstrate in any way that you are going to be a pain in the butt to work with, now you've lost it. You don't typically lose it on the technical in that interview. You typically lose it on the personal, the interpersonal. Yes?
That brings me to my next question,
Yeah.
which is, in your experience, how often do they intermingle soft skills and tech skills in the interviews?
I very rarely, actually, about a third of the time, there'll be a specific section, usually at the end, and they'll preface it every time. They go, okay, well, yeah, HR has me ask these like sort of soft skills questions. They like the technology part of it too, right? But then they'll ask, and man, you always know what's coming. You can look this up on the internet. You know they're going to ask you about a time when you had a problem with a teammate, and how did you handle that? Or a time where you had a really, really good success, and what was that and what happened, right? Okay, actually I'm glad you brought this up, because this is also an opportunity to cement the job. People like stories. Don't give 5-word answers to those things. Tell a story. Don't go on too long. Just get the point across, but tell the story of it. And you should be thinking ahead of time about points where you've done really crappy on the job and you learned something from it. Don't walk in there feeling like you're straight out of college and all you have to do is tell people all the good stuff or whatever. Like, be human, be real. All these guys and girls are going to be interviewing you. They've made idiotic, mistakes before. I was at Providence about 7 years ago, and suddenly I got dropped into being the lead on a project. I was not hired to be the lead. I was just an add-on to an already existing team. And the lead, he'd been working on this thing for 7 months, and I was there to help with some final wrap-up on it. And then I come back from lunch, and he looks like death warmed over in a microwave. He's just sitting at his desk like this. I'm like, Steve, you okay? Doesn't say a word. He had an aneurysm at lunch. Yeah, he's fine. He's fine now. It took about half a year to recover. So all of a sudden, besides the emotional impact on the team and on me of like, oh my God, this guy almost died, right? And he's gone. Besides that, suddenly I'm the lead. Some of it I handled really well. But there was an afternoon where I'm working with this developer, and she and I are arguing about a specific point, and I actually snapped a little bit and showed a little bit of a temper. People who know me know that it's really, really rare that I show a temper. And I did. And for the rest of the day, it's just eating at me. I go home at night and talk to my wife, it's just eating at me. I went back the next day and I apologized. Now, not my proudest moment, but about a year later, being interviewed by PGE, and they asked me this question: tell them about a time that you made a mistake or had a problem with a coworker. And I told them that. Again, it wasn't my proudest moment. But I didn't hold anything back on it. I did this. I, in fact, did do that. Her name's Jaya. She's a good friend of mine still. That's how I got the job. Afterwards, they told me that, like, that's the best answer they'd ever heard on that. I'm like, oh, okay, fine, that's weird praise because I was telling you how I was an idiot and mean to my coworker, right? But the point is, it was real, it was genuine. And it's a very real story. We have all done that. There's no one in this room that has an occasion like, snap at somebody, right? Hopefully it's a very, very rare occurrence. But the point is, people like to hear a story. So get comfortable telling stories. Again, this all goes back to preparation for this and the practice, the drilling you're going to need to do. There's a thing that we put on the initial video that people watch when they first find out about the Tech Academy. We're explaining how the program works. When we get towards the end of the description of all the courses, we're describing the job placement course. And the preface of it is something like, the skills necessary to get a job in technology are not necessarily in the skill set of our applicants. That's a big understatement. These aren't skills you've ever had to practice before for the most case. So practice them. You practice your coding, so you're really, really comfortable with doing your job. Practice the human interaction part of it, the job placement part of it. So, all right, so that leads you all the way to the point where hopefully, eventually, you'll filter out, all these no's, and you arrive and you're like, oh, I've done a bunch of in the building interviews, and finally you're gonna get an offer. Okay, whether or not to accept the offer. It's a very personal decision. I can give a couple pieces of advice though. I know this is like this truism that's been thrown around for decades, that when you go into an interview, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. It's true. Now, especially if you have like financial pressures, or you just completed a boot camp and you're like, my God, I need to get a job real quick so I can pay this back, or whatever it is, you might have this like, I'm going to take the first thing that says yes. How well did that work out in high school when you were dating? It didn't work out well for me. It doesn't work out well for jobs, okay? So, here's the things I've found to look out for. And if you see some of these, they can be a little bit of a red flag. If anybody who's interviewing you really thinks they're hot shit, and they're just like God's gift to the earth, I would think twice about it. It happened on a job interview a while back where the lead architect that came in, first of all, I'm relatively intelligent. This guy made me feel like a low-grade moron. He was brilliant, but he knew it. And he didn't have any problem making it very known that he knew he was super intelligent. This is a personal thing. I don't do well with people like that. I have no problem with my own level of intelligence. I'm pretty bright, but I don't need to brag about it at all, right? People that do, I don't do well with those. You're going to have your own things, the things that make you go, I'm not sure about that. Pay attention to those. So one of the biggest things I can say about accept the offer or don't accept the offer is take your time. Take your 24 hours. Take your 48 hours. Don't take a week. Sorry, this job market is pretty tough on that kind of thing. They're going to go with someone else because they're interviewing more than one person, guaranteed, right? But do take that time. They will respect you for doing so. They want you to make a good consideration, a good decision about whether you're going to get the job there. And really look at it. Look at, like, even if it's like, wow, that's the first yes I've gotten on anything in 3 months, you're going to regret it more if you say yes to the wrong fit. So, that said, just a little piece of advice about people that, can you give me some more? A piece of advice for people who are just going to get their first job in the industry, right? From a certain point of view, any job is better than no job, but only from a certain point of view. In other words, once you get your foot in your door and you're at a job, right, you'll be fine. But every once in a while, I've seen something where a person goes into that job with the stated intention, whether they say it to the person that's hiring them or not, because they would never say this. The intention is, I'm going to go 6 months and I'm going to leave and jump to something else. If you're already thinking that, I don't know if that's like the smartest thing in the world. Now, I'll tell you the truth. Often, the first job you get in technology lasts between 6 and 18 months, and then you move on to something else. It happens very often. But if that isn't what they're expecting from you, but you're going into it going, I'm just going to jump ship, you're not going to be fully engaged. You're not going to be part of that team. You're not going to put everything you've got into it, right? And the flip side is that if you like abandon that kind of a thing, like I'm just going to jump ship and I can probably get a big bump in my salary when I do so. If you like put everything you got into that role, they might hit the 6-month mark and go, man, Erik, like we really like having you here. And now that you're a working developer, what do we have to do to keep you here? Or they might find another role for you, right? So don't go into it with anything besides I'm going to give it everything I got, and I'm going to be a member of that team and contribute to it. If you are flirting with any kind of an idea of like, well, yeah, I mean, this is great for my first job, but at the first sign I get something better, I'm going to jump ship. Technology is a very small world, guys. People talk. It happens all the time. I get calls from recruiters, hiring managers. Hey, I've got so-and-so's resume on my desk, and I see that he's got Providence on his resume or whatever. You know this dude? You know this lady? I'm not going to lie. Like, if that person wasn't a pleasure to work with, I'm going to tell them. Now, this is a really cool industry. We don't suffer fools lightly. They don't last very long. So most of the people I've worked with are pretty cool, right? But I got a couple people like, yeah, you might want to move on. Don't be that person. Put everything you got into your role when you finally accept it. Okay, so that's enough from me. I want to open it up to question and answer. I'm totally fine if there isn't anything or is. You can ask me whatever you want. And by the way, it doesn't need to be related specifically to job search. Yes, you've already had enough. Her. Well, hold your thought.
With like the dress code question,
Yeah.
or even with like the phone call, with like knowing who you're talking to, pairing that with, you're sending out 23 applications a day, like how do you do that? How would you get that information?
You're going to know ahead of time if you're going to get a call.
So they'll like email
Yeah.
you and tell you they're going to call?
Yeah, very well. Okay, that's not always true. That's a good question. That's a good question. Actually, that's a really good question. Here's why. So you're about to send out your, you found some sort of a job on, Dice or wherever you're finding your jobs, right? Actually, I want to make a note about where to look for jobs in a second. But you've got this company, and you don't have any idea of their identity, what they are, what the culture might be like. You better be looking that up really briefly, 1 or 2 3-minute search, just to write your cover letter. Now, here's what I recommend on that, right? This is just, I've found a pretty decent approach to life. So you find this job listing, and it's for, Acme. You've never heard of Acme, right? They make explosives. Okay, sorry. So here's this company, Acme. You've never heard of them. You're like, look it up, find their website, right? And first of all, you can get a decent idea for the industry, but also the sort of like beingness or identity or culture just from the website alone. A real good place to look to get some idea about the company is 1, success stories from their clients. Look those over. And 2, if there's any kind of a blog, look there. You can see what kind of communication comes out of that company. And 3, I've found that there's usually a leadership page. If you look there and find the people involved in technology, you're going to have some idea of like, are these all young guys and girls in their 20s? So this is obviously clearly a startup. Or look at this guy or girl, they've been obviously in their 40s or 50s. They've got some good solid leadership. You have right there a little bit of idea about that culture. So there's a lot more that can be done with that simply because it's going to be you looking and getting your own impression. But the senior thing for me has always been, what is it that interests me about that company? As an example, I was looking at that senior leadership thing, and there was some guy's name, and I don't know whether the name rang a bell or whatever, but I Googled him, and I found a blog entry on a blog associated with their site that I didn't even know existed. And I read a recent article from him, and it was fantastic. It was a really good article. You better believe I mentioned that in my cover letter, because it was real. It wasn't some, feigned interest to try to seem like I'm the right fit for them. I loved that article. I thought it was fantastic. So I mentioned that. Hey, I read the article from your CTO about blah. I thought it was excellent. I got to call back, right? So here's the point is, even in those 2 or 3 minutes of searching, you've already got a little bit of an idea about what the company is. It doesn't need to be a deep dive. Another thing about this is I want to stress is that the more time you spend looking through the requirements for a job and looking through everything about the company, frankly, the more opportunity you have to figure out why it isn't a fit for you and you shouldn't apply. Don't do it. If there's any level of interest, if you have any personal interest in anything about the job requirements, the job description, the company, then apply. It's your interest that's senior in all of this. If there's something that you find personally fascinating or exciting or you're curious about, that will drive your interest in the job search process, and it will come across to the people you're talking to. It happens it happens all because there's so many cool things going on in technology. And you see some, job posting for a job, some Internet of Things kind of like product. My God, I never thought of that. We have an internet-connected like shoehorn. I'm just making stuff up. Shoehorns aren't even used very much. I don't think anybody knows what the hell that is. Anyway, it's an internet-connected set of dice, so that when you're playing Dungeons, you're like, okay, I'll stop. Anyway, the thing I want to stress is that the first few times you're doing this, it may take a little bit longer to really like, oh, what is this company? What do they do? You might spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes looking through, but you're going to get quicker and quicker at it and just get an idea of like, what's the identity of this place? What are they kind of like? A lot of it is another factor is, and this might be a little bit, or more of a deep dive, is it going to be a public-facing role? Like, for example, IBM has a company out in Beaverton called Ceteris. And Ceteris only services the mortgage industry, and they never see their clients at all. There's 2,000 people working that giant building out there in Beaverton, and they never see their clients. They only have one client, too, which is kind of interesting. It's called Fannie Mae, the big company, the organization that handles mortgaging for America. And every once in a while, they might have one of the representatives of the client come there, but they're hardly ever there. So you know that in general, wow, you're not going to have a client-facing sort of like way you dress, way you interact. But on the other hand, they work in the mortgage industry, which is financial, which is probably a bit conservative. So you need to kind of think these things through. When in doubt, just dress up nice. Be a nice person. But you can get an idea. I know that was a rather long-winded answer, right? But the homework you've done at the beginning, right before you're about to actually click apply, will give you a little bit of idea. So that way, even if you get caught flat-footed and they call you a week later, like, oh yeah, it's a terrorist. You'll have an idea of what they're like. Make sense? Okay. Hold on. You have one?
You can go first.
Good. Go ahead.
So like when you're applying and like researching companies, like obviously you would apply to the companies first that you would have more of like a heart investment in, and then so you said it's like an average of 80 to 200 resumes before someone gets hired. How many, like let's say it's 200 resumes, how many of those 200 resumes do you think a person actually has like would have a more passionate input?
I don't know. It really depends on. That's a fair question. Like, there's a certain point in my job search, right, where some of them I'm looking through. Let's say there's 10 different applications I do in a few hours, right? And half of them like, wow, that's really cool. The other half are, well, it says senior developer and it's in the Microsoft stack. I'll figure out whether I like them later. Okay, click apply. Because at the very least, I know I can speak the language and I know they're using the technology stack that I'm most comfortable with, and I'll find out more a bit later about it. So I don't know. That's a personal thing, but more than half the time, I've got like a thing that made me go, oh, that's really cool. And it can, honestly, it can just be the industry. Like if they work in healthcare, and you've got a lot of healthcare experience and you don't mind working in that area, you're like, well, they're in healthcare. That's a good thing. I'll apply there, right? So it doesn't need to be something super, super unique to that area. But the point is that I'll say we'll flip it around. If there's something if it doesn't appeal to you at all one bit, or you have a problem with it, don't apply. I will never apply to a cannabis shop, any kind of a dev shop. Sorry, if that bothers anybody. I don't care. I never apply to a pharmaceutical company. They can go away. They don't get Erik's scope. Sorry, and that's a personal thing, and so I would never even apply to them. Right? So that's the flip side of it, which I don't like generally concentrate on the negative. I'm trying to find things I like about them. I see that, I'm like, yeah, that's a no. Yeah, can of this, can of that, not gonna happen. Can't. So that's the negative side of it. On the flip side, yeah, most of the time it's just like, am I interested? It's that simple question. Am I interested in this? Yes? Okay, boom. You may have a real precise idea of exactly what it is. Like I said, some nerdy like, look at what they're doing, that's really fascinating. They work in rocket, software that manages rockets or whatever. Or it can just be, wow, they make a product that you like. Maybe there's a company down in Tiger that works in the winter sports products, and skiing and all that. Maybe you love that. That'll come across, man. You call them up, you're like, wow, yeah, I love what you guys do. And it's true, and so it utterly communicates, and instantly they like you more, and they're more willing to talk to you. Does that help kind of answer that?
Yeah.
Yes?
Okay, So I've seen a lot of people run into this and run into this myself as well. What do you do, say you're applying on Dice or LinkedIn or Indeed, and there's no option to turn in a cover letter?
Submit it.
Just submit it? Just resume and that's it?
Yep, you send it in. Yeah. When in doubt, send it out. When in doubt, send that resume out. Just send it out. And you're right, that happens sometimes. Often there's a little place you can put something in, but sometimes it's not. They just want the resume. Okay, fine, got it. Send the resume in. Yes.
Question. I've heard that a lot of senior developers or people that are very into the industry have one main language. Like they know everything, but they have one main language. Let's say your main language is Java. Can you say, "Oh, my goal is to work for Microsoft"? Because they have C#.
Oh, like work for Microsoft or work on a job that uses Microsoft technologies? Which one are you asking?
For Microsoft.
I don't know enough about that specific employer. In terms of like what they hire, I have a strong feeling because I've worked to use their technologies for years. I don't think they did anything with Java. I really don't. Right now, on the flip side of it, by the time you've used one of these top-level object-oriented programming languages like C# or Java or even Python to a great extent, by the time you've used one for 5 or 10 years, you could be given a Java project and you'd be fine. You'd be able to work your way through it. It'd be a pain in the ass, and you'd be swearing a lot, and up late at night, but you could figure it out, right? And I will say this, a lot, especially if they're hiring mid to senior level talent, they are less interested in an exact match on the primary language. When you're coming out of a boot camp, if it's a Java job and you learn C#, that's a hard sell, guys. And you wouldn't win very much on the job. It would be extremely frustrating if that was your first gig. Now that said, it does happen. Like in our first year, we had a guy that interviewed for a Java position, and he knew about 5 days ahead of time it was going to be a Java interview. It's like, oh, what the hell? I'll try it. And so he spent 5 days just completely boning up on Java and the differences between Java and C#, and he got the job. $72,000 a year. I'll never forget it. It was great. Like, wow, you don't even know Java. You got hired for it, right? And he did really well on the job. I kept in touch with him afterwards. So there are exceptions to it, but in general, in the earlier part of your career, that's a real hard thing to kind of, on those really powerful in-depth languages that you're going to use as your core. That's a bit of a leap. But like, if you've done it for many years, you can switch to another language. When I picked up Python, it was like, okay, fine. So you indent things differently, and how you create your objects is a little bit different. You know, how you import other libraries of code is a little bit different. But at the end of the day, you know, you're still going to use almost all the same sort of programming paradigms. That's my opinion on the matter. Anyway, yes.
What would your recommendations be on working on like side projects?
Do it always. Okay, let's define side project. I will say this. Okay, anybody here familiar with the movie Glengarry Glen Ross? Anybody ever heard of that? Okay, it's a movie about sales, right? And it comes from a play. It's a very intense movie. And at one point, is it Alec Bradley? Is that
Baldwin?
Baldwin? Thank you. Yeah. So Alex Baldwin. Jeez, his character's an a-hole in this movie, right? And he's just yelling at the salespeople. He says, ABC, always be closing. And he's just right in their face, right? Always be coding. Always be learning something new. And whether you're doing it as a formal activity because you're involved in some open source project and you actually are like pulling down some kind of request for a feature and you're trying to build that feature, or whether it's just, man, I heard about this Angular thing and I kind of like some of this front end stuff. I'm just going to build something on the weekend with it, right? Always be doing that. There's always, I've usually got a short list of about 3 or 4 different things that I've got my attention on. I'm like, I want to know more about that thing. Right now it's Go. I want to know more about the language Go, and I want to do even more work on AI. I just happen to like those things, right? And I've got the ones at the bottom of the list. And I'll learn Java if I get forced to. My C#, right? But always be doing something like that. Now, side projects for pay, this is a whole different story, right? I just want to address this a little bit. I haven't had a chance to talk about it in a long time. Occasionally we have someone that's going to come through the boot camp And they're like, oh, this is gonna be great. I'll become a developer and I'll be able to work remotely from wherever I could be on the beach in Borneo and I could have a job. You're on crack. Stop it. Not gonna happen. You're not gonna come out of a boot camp and be able to get a job like that. Now, you wouldn't want it either. It would be horrifying. And here's why. When you're doing these side projects, especially if they're for pay, there's two things that make it extremely challenging. The first one is these jobs are of a size and scope that someone thinks one developer can handle them. So it's usually a small entity, a smaller business, and they don't know technology at all. So you enter into the picture a couple real challenging factors. Software is expensive and it takes a long time. Software is expensive and it takes a long time. And software is expensive and it takes a long time. And you have to repeat that over and over again in your own mind and to your client, but they're never going to get it. They're not going to understand that it's expensive and it takes a long time. All they know is the user interface. And it's nice and simple. Well, that's simple. Why would it be really that simple? Because someone took a long time to make it simple. So there you are, and you're like, oh man, I could take on a little web development project on the side. That'll be great. You're chained to that project. Now, I don't want to scare you away from this stuff. There'll be a point where you're like, I'm going to be brave enough to do this. And I do recommend it after a time. But if you did that right out of boot camp, oh my God, you'll lose money. You will literally lose money. You'll be working for free for a long time. Because the other part of it is, they've got a budget in mind. And one, it's about 1/10 of what it'll really cost. And so you have to try to pull them up. And two, if you ever go over budget, they're like, no, we said it was going to be X. And you're always going to misestimate how much time it gets the thing done. Why? Because you've only been doing this for 3 to 6 months and you can't estimate a project really well. And you shouldn't be expected to. So I know I'm like yammering on about this, but I kind of warn people about it because I've done it. And then you're chained to this project. And at a certain point, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're like, I don't know how to solve this. And for the last 3 weeks, I've been working on it essentially for free. No, worse than for free. I'm losing money by working on it. Why did I do this again? Now, that said, after you've been on the job for, it depends on you. A year, 2, 3. You want to pull in one of these side projects where you're getting paid for it. Yeah, make sure it's relatively small in scope. And I would insist on per hour pricing. That's a personal thing. Your client's going to want a budget. You're going to say, I want to spend $5,000 on this. And by the way, if any coding project ever gets done for $5,000, I want to see it, right? But I want to spend X amount of money on this. Okay, that's great. And maybe we'll hit that, but you're going to pay me $75 an hour or whatever it is. And if we get to the end of your budget and we're not done, I don't work anymore. So it's a personal thing, learned over many, many painful years. So I went a little afield in the answer to that, but I just wanted an opportunity to talk about that. In terms of side projects, always be learning, always be coding, always be building something on the side. And a note of recommendation about that. Let's say there's some new technology that came out. I'll tell you like how I learned MVC. MVC means Model View Controller, and it's a set of pre-made code that helps to create web applications. Very, very popular now. When I first started working with it back in 2011, it wasn't very popular. It was still, especially in the Microsoft world, it was like, well, yeah, they debuted version 1.0 of that. I'm not sure what that thing is. Well, I learned it well. It's made me a lot of money. And the approach I took to it on is one that I recommend to you. So here it is, some new thing comes out. Some new language, some new framework, some new tool of some sort. You might look at it and get a really cool idea of a place you could apply that. Oh, I could build some kind of an application for my bowling league or something, right? Or in other words, you've got some real world application you can kind of dream up. And you want to build something with this new technology that accomplishes this. Don't do it. If it's your first time learning this technology, find a decent tutorial and just do the tutorial exactly as written. Don't vary from it one bit. Just do that thing. And I've learned this the hard way over the years. The reason I recommend that is because if you don't, you're trying to handle two different things at once. You're trying to handle learning and working with an unfamiliar technology while you're also solving all of the business domain challenges of the real world application that you're trying to solve. Good luck. You're going to take losses. You're not going to be able to get this framework or tool that you're unfamiliar with to do what you need to over here, and you get all hung up in it. Just learn it the standard way out of the box. And at that point, when you approach your real world problem, you're going to already have an idea of how to architect it because you'll be familiar with the technology. So, just a recommendation. Does that help on that? Yeah. Yes.
This came up. I'm early on in my job search process, but I see a difference between contract positions and full time.
Yeah.
Just what's your spin on that? And as a new person, should we be skeptical or just jump right in and take what we can get?
I like this question. When I first thought of the idea of the school and I projected what it would be like for our graduates, I thought that because I didn't know the market, how the market would receive, entry-level developers from a coding boot camp. By the way, when we started the coding boot camp, there were maybe 13 of them in America. It was a really new idea, and I wasn't sure whether the marketplace would even be willing to hire them. Although I'd heard that people were getting hired, so I didn't know. My turns out completely correct assumption was that people would get a lot of contract work. That isn't really actually the case, and our job placement directors can back me up on this. Most people get full-time jobs. So, as to whether there's a preference one way or the other, that's a real personal thing. So, I speak to this a little bit in the job placement course, but here's a high-level view. In my experience, if you want to have a really aggressive trajectory through the first part of your career and just keep escalating how much you get paid, going contract can be a good route. It's got some real disadvantages or challenges. When you go contract, one, it's a contract. You can be let go like that. And it's happened. It's happened to me. It's not a lot of fun. Budget disappears, and you go in one day and find out you don't have a job. It's an awful fun phone call to make to your wife, by the way. So you need to be completely prepared for and willing to experience being let go at the drop of a hat and suddenly have to dive at 900 miles an hour into the job search again, right? If you're willing to experience that, some certainty and confidence in yourself, you're going to get a job, okay, great, but know that it's going to happen. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, man, that's an emotional punch. To be let go with no warning is not fun for anybody. And when you're a contractor, you're a contractor. Like as an example, I was out at IBM when I was a contractor. Loved the place. It's one of the best places I've ever worked, right? I was doing great. My manager's real happy with me. And then the CEO of IBM, in a cost-cutting move, decides that they're going to go from 400,000 employees worldwide to 360,000. They laid off 40,000 people in 1 week. If you're IBM, you can do that on that order of magnitude. They're going to keep around some contractor? No. So I find out with 3 hours warning that I don't have a job anymore. Not a fun day for me or my manager because he had a bunch of stuff he was working on. Okay, all right, you deal with it and you move on and you call your favorite recruiter and say, hey, funny thing about IBM. And then they get to work for you, right? So that's the challenge of it. The advantage of it is this. You get constantly exposed to new technologies. You have to be forced to work with and become adept at new technologies. So when you go to the job search the next time around, hopefully at the end of your contract and not some early let go or something like that, right? Now you have an even better skill set. And you were making, say, $50 an hour. You can tell your recruiter who's going to help you with this contract job, I'm at 50. You got to get me more than 50. And they know that, and they'll find you that. So you can just go up and up and up. And I did that. I climbed from 42 an hour to 50 to 52, 53, 57, and 75, one contract after the other. I was willing to experience that. The complete freak out when you suddenly have to get a new job. And even if it's the end of the job, about a month ahead of time, going full on into job search mode and wow, if I don't get anything, I've got an unpaid week off. That's not fun, So, like I said, advantages and disadvantages. But for people that are just breaking into the industry, most people get a full-time job. And the advice I gave earlier about just putting your all into it, I think would apply. Beyond that, it really is a personal thing. Many people really this is my home. This is my group. I'm going to settle in here and just become part of the team. Find out how we do what we do and really just get more and more understanding, become more and more valuable because of that long track record with this group and this business and this way of doing programming. So, yeah, there's disadvantages to that too, though. You can spend 5, 6, 7 years only using this sort of technology, and a slow rate of change of their internal technology means that the industry is years past you, and then you suddenly, for whatever reason, find yourself on the job market again. Man, I don't know anything about this React, JavaScript stuff. I've been working in this old school web technologies. I got to get up to speed real quick. So again, it's a bit of that can happen, you know. So it's a personal thing. That's my short answer to that. It's a very, very personal thing. My experience, I like the contract work because it was constantly, like I said, exposed to new technologies, and I love negotiating for a higher wage every time. It's not a bad thing to do.
Eric?
Yes. Oh yeah.
If you just want to take a couple more questions, and then, because I don't know if people are wanting to leave, but
Oh,
if you
yeah.
want to do a Q&A afterwards, that's like.
Oh, that's I didn't realize it's 2:10. So hold on just a second. Yeah, we'll take one more question from Ian. I know there are other questions in the audience. Feel free to leave. I won't be offended at all. That went really, really quickly. I didn't know I was going to fill an hour. But yeah, we'll end off right after Ian's question. Go ahead.
In your experience, because you said that you've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
How fast would you say that technology has evolved and advanced, and how quickly did you have to learn something new every single time it happened?
I don't know how to judge the rate of that. It's a fair question, Ian. Like the rate of the change, it's just that it's continuous. It is absolutely continuous. That said, you're going to find, as the years go by, that certain segments change much more rapidly than others. Right now, over the past 3 to 5 years, like for example, the whole area of using JavaScript and JavaScript being a primary language came almost out of nowhere. I mean, it isn't completely out of nowhere, but JavaScript 6-7 years ago was like a second-rate player in terms of computer languages. And then some bright people figured out a way to actually use your browser, Chrome or Firefox, or if you're forced to, Internet Explorer, you get to use your browser as a primary computing device. Grab a bunch of data from the server and have this browser process it and do all of your coding in the browser using that browser, that computer program. Well, browsers use JavaScript to do that. And so all of a sudden, this whole area of tremendous creativity made one, JavaScript is suddenly a language you better know, and two, the change in that was unbelievably rapid. Every few weeks, a brand new sort of approach or framework was coming out of that area. And if you, hitch your wagon to one of those and just become this is the next best thing, and this is absolutely going to be like the technology for years, good luck, because 6 months later, nobody's ever even heard of that. This is an example, right? So overall, it is a constantly evolving area, technology, right? But you'll find that certain pockets of it change a lot more. As you gain experience in the industry, you get a little bit better at predicting which horse will win when these things start to change really rapidly. And depending upon who your employer is, they may be very risk averse and not even want to try any of that stuff, which means your weekend projects better include what's going on in the industry. Or you might work for a shop that's a little more nimble, a little more embracing risk, and jump in and try some of these new things. But the point is, it's always changing, and you absolutely have to be prepared for that. All right, so we're going to end off officially, but anybody wants to hang out, I'd be glad to answer more questions.
Thank you.
Someone had a question.